From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today's show is all about staying safe during extreme heat. We'll look at a report that shows heat is a rising concern for workers here in Wisconsin.
We know that 70% of heat-related fatalities on the job take place during the first week of work because people's bodies just need that time to get used to it.
Plus, we'll share some tips on how to exercise outside safely during the summer months.
Our bodies have a harder time releasing heat in the summer, really when it's humid, more so than when it's hot. The humidity is really what impedes our ability to release that heat.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect, but first, here are today's headlines. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. We'll start with a look at how the temperatures this summer compares to recent years and how the summer weather has become more volatile with climate change. Lake Effect's Becky Mortensen is joined by Steve Vavris, the director of the State Climatology Office at UW-Madison, for an overview of this summer's heat.
How has the heat been in Wisconsin this summer?
It's been warmer than normal in Wisconsin this summer, but not drastically so. What's really stood out this summer to me is how humid it's been, particularly last month. Last month was the second most humid summer in Wisconsin since at least 1979. We have good records going back that far. And so if it felt muggy most of the time, it's because it was. And I think that made it feel hotter than the air temperature actually was.
With hot weather, what stands out to me is those kind of several days in a row where it's just so hot. Is there a reason for that?
That's just the day-to-day weather systems that we get. We had a lot of airflow from the south, bringing moisture and heat from the Gulf for much of July. And then we started getting winds from the northwest, from Canada, which had the advantage of bringing in cooler and drier air, but the big disadvantage that it brought a lot of smoke, and that smoke lingered for a whole week.
So you mentioned the humidity kind of standing out amongst other years. How does the heat compare to other years in recent history?
The heat has not been excessive. I'm sure June and July on the whole has been warmer than normal, but not greatly so. And there were some heat waves. We had a big heat wave in late June. We had another one early July and another one sort of middle July, but none that really were severe. Wisconsin has yet to hit 100 degrees this year. The highest has been 98 so far. So we have escaped compared to some parts of the country and some parts of the world that have had much worse heat than we have.
Taking a longer view, how have heat trends changed over time in Wisconsin?
Well, it's really interesting. If you look at, first of all, summer as a season is warming in Wisconsin, and we have good records going back to the 1890s that show this. But we haven't been warming in summer as much as in the other seasons. So that's been a blessing if you don't like super hot weather. Nights have been warming faster than days. That's another clear trend that we're seeing. And that also shows up in extreme temperatures. One of the curious facts about the warming climate is that Wisconsin and other parts of the upper Midwest have yet to see a clear increase in extreme temperatures, let's say 90 degrees, 100-degree days, conditions like that. Those have been really flat over time. No upward trend that like we would expect in a warming climate. But where we are seeing the extreme heat show up is at night. We're getting more of those muggy nights when the temperature doesn't fall out of the 70s. Sometimes it even stays above 80. Very dangerous conditions to sleep in if you don't have air conditioning.
So what are some of the most notable ways that these warmer summers and just warmer seasons all around impact the state?
Different ways. One way is that it can be a boost for agriculture, for crops. They can get an earlier start in the spring, later end in the fall to the growing season. So by that alone can be a benefit. Where you have to be careful, though, is that certain crops respond negatively to extreme heat. Certain crops like it. Tomatoes are known for liking hot weather, for example. Corn likes it hot, but not too hot. Once it gets into the 90s, it can actually depress corn production. So it depends. It also depends on people's personal preferences. Some people like it really warm. Others would rather it be in the 70s all summer long. So it's a mixed bag, like most trends in weather. But Wisconsin, I would say, has really dodged the bullet in terms of experiencing more extreme heat. We've been expecting that trend will change, and I think in the future we will be seeing more extreme summers. But so far, that has not really taken shape.
What are some things Wisconsinites should be aware of or maybe take into account on especially warm summer days?
People should realize that heat is the number one weather killer. We think about dramatic weather events like tornadoes and floods, but heat kills more people in this country than any other weather phenomenon. And that's something that we can change. It's something that's preventable. One of the reasons it's so deadly is because it often sneaks up on people. You don't think you're getting that hot. You don't feel like you're in danger, but all of a sudden you can cross that threshold and be in real trouble. And so that's one thing that people need to realize, is to take it seriously. We also know that it hurts certain populations more than others. The very old, the very young, socially isolated people on certain medications are more sensitive to extreme heat than others. And we also know that urban heat islands, like in Milwaukee, amplify the danger, and it can create compound problems for vulnerable populations. If you happen to be in a middle of Milwaukee where it's already getting hotter than elsewhere, and you're in among the more vulnerable populations, being very old, very young, for example, you can be at double risk.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect.
Thank you, Becky.
Steve Avarice is the director of the State Climatology Office at UW-Madison. He spoke with Lake Effect's Becky Mortensen. When it's hot and you need to get out of the house, there are plenty of public options to choose from. Milwaukee area residents can spend time at a splash pad, water parks, or libraries for a break from the heat. But as Nick Tomorrow says, sometimes everyday places are the best cooling centers. He's a housing services interventionist at Milwaukee County's Department of Health and Human Services, and he joins Lake Effect's Sam Woods to discuss where to go to beat the heat and how the local government responds to a heat advisory.
What are the options for people who are saying, like, hey, a heat wave is coming, I don't have air conditioning in my house, or just, I want to get out of the house and I want a cool space to go. What are the options out there?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And we talk about this a lot and really want to highlight the places that are really open to people every day. And I think that sometimes we don't always think about. So, I think a lot about and highlight to people, community spaces like senior centers, bringing up the older population and just that population we worry quite a bit about in these heat events if they're home alone especially and more isolated. But senior centers, the county has a number of great ones. Libraries, I can't stress enough just how great the library system is across the county and how critical it is as a public resource for any number of reasons. But it's just a great public space for people to be and go and get out of the heat as needed. You think about even if you're really having a day where you can't break the heat at home, get out to area, shopping malls, go to a movie. We think about places maybe like the beach or splash pads, pools. But it's important because I think there's this dialogue around cooling centers, and we always get a lot of feedback about that term, cooling centers. It's not really understood by a lot of people. So we need to do a better job sometimes of just reframing and talking about this in a more straightforward way to say, hey, we're worried about people if you're at home and you don't have air conditioning. You really just need to beat the heat, and you need to do basic things to keep yourself safe. But you also need to think about places that maybe you just don't always go. Maybe people don't go to libraries a lot or senior centers or museums, but it is a place you can go to really cool off. And, I'd highlight the Weather Service, National Weather Service. We work with Tim Halbach really closely, just an outstanding meteorologist who works in this space of trying to work with community organizations, governmental organizations, to get information out in an effective manner and really provide these forecasts. He has taught us that heat and cold temperature is something that they can really, really effectively forecast, and oftentimes several days ahead with really great accuracy. So we have time to prepare. We have time to message to people and really look at what are the realistic things that we can do in government and different organizations to help communicate to people and keep people safe.
So I hear an underlying message here of don't overthink it. If you're hot, get to a place with air conditioning. And I appreciate that because when I first started looking into this story, that's what I had in mind was those splash pads, those pools, those water parks, somewhere with water, somewhere that screamed kind of summer fun, somewhere you go when it's hot. But has this kind of don't overthink it type messaging always been the messaging from government, or has that changed over time?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question because, when I was more starting out in this work, I was the same. You hear cooling centers, like, okay, we have to organize cooling centers. We gotta figure out the place and everything. But it is, just so important that people think about the normal sites. I can tell you from my experience of being involved in, a team that will organize specific cooling sites, meaning when you had the heat emergency, you would organize with whether it was schools or churches or different public places that we could open specifically as kind of a quote-unquote extra space for people to go. And those are generally just not well attended at all. And so one of the things I've learned is that we really have to, especially in local government and with obviously resource constraints, have to think about how are we spending our time, what is useful to the community, and sometimes really focusing on this quote-unquote cooling center, which I always understand why people bring it up, but opening up separate dedicated spaces is not always the best use of our capacity, not to mention there really is no specific dedicated funding. Now, certain communities do a good job of looking at what is the forecast, what are the dedicated hours, and sometimes we're going to look to extend hours at specific places that may really help to support the community and message that to community. Organizations like your own that are helping us get the word out about this kind of thing, we really appreciate it because that's what we need to focus on is when we have these resources for people, oftentimes they're just not going to have access to knowing about it unless we can effectively get the word out.
So for someone who does not own a car or have easy access to transportation, how do you reach these folks and get them to cooling centers when it's needed?
So I work in homeless services mainly with the Department of Health and Human Services and Housing Services. And we obviously have a group of people that we work with who are one of the most vulnerable in the community around this topic, who are literally living outside in different places. So we're going to people and we're checking on them. We're bringing them water. We're encouraging them to seek, out a cool place. There's innovative ideas that are done in other cities, and we have done and trying to continue to progress plans to operationalize cooling buses. When you think about people who are in different parts of the city, sometimes don't have access to transportation. If we're able to operationalize routes or specific places that buses can be where somebody can really hop on a bus for an hour or two and cool off. It sounds maybe odd, but when you're in these extreme temperatures, from a heat health perspective, you just really have to think about, okay, I need to bring my core body temperature down for a period of time. And, access to air conditioning, whether it be in a building or something like a county bus, it can be, incredibly important to people.
So I want to end on an action step that I or a listener can take when heat is in the forecast. What can I do to help out?
the other really important thing that I always stress is just people thinking about other people. Obviously you think about your loved ones, you think about your friends, but think about your community members. I mean, if you live in an apartment building and you know that you have neighbors who don't have air conditioning and they're older, checking in on them. And it's just, one of the aspects and one of the things within these heat events can make the biggest difference for individuals who are more vulnerable is just somebody checking in on them. And if they are struggling, then doing these simple things that can help them. But really, when we have tragic events, it's generally because we just don't have enough help for specific people. And focus on the elderly, focus on children, focus on people with medical conditions or certain comorbidities that are going to make them much more vulnerable to heat. And they don't always recognize that they could get into trouble in these extended heat events.
Check in on your neighbors, check in on your friends, check in on your family. Nick, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect.
Thanks so much for covering this topic. Appreciate it.
Nick Tomorrow is a housing services interventionist at Milwaukee County's Department of Health and Human Services. He joined Lake Effect's Sam Woods. Later in the show, we'll get some tips on how to exercise safely in warm weather. But first, we'll learn about the risks that hot weather poses to people who work outside. That's coming up next on Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. It's been hot in Wisconsin this summer, with nearly 40 days of above average heat. That can be a serious health concern for people who work outdoors, but there aren't many protections for heat safety on the job. Kate McCoy directs the Occupational Health and Safety Surveillance Program at the State Department of Health Services. She co-wrote a report last year that shows heat is a concern for workers here in Wisconsin. Lake Effect's Excret Nunez is joined by McCoy to talk about the dangers of high heat in the workplace and ways to stay safe.
A report you co-authored last year says heat stress on the job could be a bigger problem as climate change starts to make days hotter. What kind of things are we worried about?
In the worst case scenario, heat can kill. People are not meant to work in very hot conditions without proper protections in place. So we really need to make sure that workers and employers are aware that this is a real threat, that it can overtake somebody very quickly, that it can affect even young and healthy individuals, and that even when the worst doesn't come to pass, that heat can take its toll on people's health generally, can cause organ damage, kidney damage, heart damage. And overall, it can just make life miserable for people on the job, right? Raise a lot of other risks along the way. So there are certain things that employers and workers can do to avoid those worst case scenarios. And we want to make sure that the public is aware of those.
And in this report, you looked at different jobs and occupations that reported problems with heat and filed workers' compensation claims. What are some of the fields you looked at?
So in that particular report, like you said, we were looking at workers' compensation claims. So that's one way that you can get at who is affected by heat. And in that data, we saw a lot of the claims were from folks like firefighters, protective service workers, people operating heavy machinery, people working in manufacturing. And more generally, we know those are people who are at risk. But there's even a broader group than we are able to show with that data source. So really, anyone who does outdoor work in hot conditions without proper precautions in place can be at risk. So you think about your construction sites, landscaping, agriculture, utility workers, delivery drivers, all those folks and more. And then indoor workers can also be at substantial risk. So if you think of stuffy, hot spaces or a location where there's equipment that radiates a lot of heat, all of a sudden, even if it's not terribly hot outside, those spaces can become very hot inside. Think about a warehouse, think about a hot kitchen, think about a stuffy attic that someone is removing asbestos from, where it's much hotter up there than it is outside. All of a sudden, those can become very risky environments. So really, there are a lot of workers who can be at risk. under the wrong conditions.
So, workers who are experiencing heat illness, what are some of the common signs and symptoms that coworkers and employers should watch out for when they're working outside or in stuffy, hot places, like you mentioned?
So the most dangerous things are, if somebody starts passing out, if they start seizing, having seizures, if they are acting confused or abnormal or slurred speech, that's an immediate 911 call. And there's some other things we can talk about that need to happen right then. But there are also earlier signs and symptoms that people need to pay attention to. If you're feeling dizzy, lightheaded, if you're getting nauseous or vomiting, or getting a real headache or cramps on the job when it's hot, those are a few of the symptoms to be aware of. And really, I would say to people who are working in hot conditions, if it feels uncomfortably hot to you and you're feeling off, start paying attention to it right then.
And something else that I found really interesting too was that the report noted that workers who would file worker compensation claims for heat-related illnesses were often denied. Can you talk more about that finding and why you and your co-authors found that concerning?
Isn't that an interesting finding? Yes, it is something that we wanted to call out in that data because we know this is a bigger and bigger concern for more people, not just in Wisconsin. And it was surprising to us that we were seeing more and more denials in the claims. We're not sure exactly why that is. We are in contact with folks who work with insurers and workers' comp generally and really trying to get the word out about that finding. But what we want to make sure is that people are not being dissuaded or discouraged from bringing up these claims or for coming forward and saying, I need medical help, and this happened on the job. People need that income if they are injured or sickened on the job. They need that to cover the hours that they've lost after they were downed by heat. And we also need that information because, like we used in our report, it's one of the ways that we can try to keep track of how many people are affected. So it's problematic when people are dissuaded from being able to make those legitimate claims.
Well, reflecting on what we've talked about so far, what's your message to employers on how to create a safe workspace outdoors and indoors?
Absolutely. So there are things that employers can do that make a huge difference. The sort of tagline for both employers and workers, the shortcut is water, rest, shade. But when we break it down, here's kind of some of the things it looks like. So if you're an employer, that shade part is really about how do you put measures in place that counteract heat, whether that's air conditioning, shaded areas, exhaust ventilation, using misters, giving out specialized cooling PPE, things like that. So that's one thing that you can do to just reduce the heat risk. For indoor environments, another thing you can do is insulate equipment that produces a lot of heat. The other thing is make scheduling adjustments. So that might be scheduling some of that heavier lifting, heavier work during cooler parts of the day or at night. It might mean slowing down your production schedules enough to get those rest breaks in. And I try to tell businesses, go slow to go fast here. Our productivity is already down in hot weather. And so even though it might feel bad for employers to say we're going to build in rest breaks when you feel a lot of pressure, note that those rest breaks are refreshing your workforce and keeping people sharp. And it keeps them from being sick. And it also keeps them from making expensive mistakes with equipment. Build those things into your schedules. If you have new folks on the job, make sure that they have time to acclimatize, let their bodies get used to heat. We know that 70% of heat-related fatalities on the job take place during the first week of work because people's bodies just need that time to get used to it. So that's one thing that can be done. Also, for both the employer and the frontline supervisors and workers to know the signs and symptoms of heat-related illness, post information about the signs and symptoms and the 911 calls and the emergency response that you need to enact, and just spend a little bit of time training on it. And most importantly is tell your workers that it's okay for them to speak up sooner rather than later when they're feeling the effects of heat, because too often people push through, and that's when some of the scariest scenarios happen.
The report also notes that federal and state level protections are needed to keep people safe from heat at work. Is this something you're noticing lawmakers at both the federal and state levels are working on?
Yes and no. So there is an effort right now federally that has been going on for a while to get national heat protections through OSHA. So ever since the Occupational Safety and Health Administration was formed, there have been people who've been saying we need heat protections. And now that process is farther along than it's ever been. It's an active, what's called a rulemaking process right now. But like a lot of things federally right now, there's a lot of uncertainty around whether or not that will go into place. It is positive that it's moving forward at this point. Also, Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin and some other of her colleagues have, from their position, sort of reinforced the need for a federal standard and proposed federal heat legislation, which pretty much backs what OSHA is trying to put into place. So those are really good signs federally. We don't have anything at the state level currently, and that would be nice to have since the future is uncertain right now about whether or not there'll be a federal heat law. That's another avenue that could be pursued, and there are states that have heat protections in place.
Kate McCoy is a program director for the Occupational Health and Safety Surveillance Program at the State Department of Health Services. She also co-wrote a report last year on heat risk in the workplace. She spoke with Lake Effect's Expert Nunez. Now we'll look at how workers took heat safety into their own hands. Kevin Schwardfager is the president of Teamsters Local 344. The union represents service workers in Milwaukee and surrounding counties, including UPS workers. Schwardfager joins Lake Effect's Expert Nunez to talk about the heat safety standards UPS employees fought to have in their contract.
So I have been a member for approximately 13 years. I started off part-time working night sort at UPS, loading semi-trucks. And then after that, I was a package car driver delivering in the Milwaukee area. And I have been a business agent or an officer, a member of the local union staff for the past 7.5 years approximately.
And you've shared with me that you were previously a package car driver for UPS. Tell me about some of the heat-related issues you would often experience while on the job.
Well, UPS package cars do not have, and at the time that I was driving them, did not have any air conditioning at all. There would be certain venting that you could try to utilize, but it got very hot. And remember that you're driving in a giant metal box directly in the sunlight. And so temperatures would very, very regularly get over 100, well over 100 degrees in the back. It would be very hot, and you would have to try to find ways to deal with that and watch yourself, especially in the summer months, to keep yourself safe.
And what are some of the ways you would cool down, or would you, when you were a package car driver?
Well, a lot of it is knowing you, right? So I used to bring big plastic jugs of water, like gallon jugs. You know, you'd pour it on your head, pour it on your back, pour it into your hat. Whatever you had to do to keep yourself cool. If you need to take a second, you try to take a second, but also remember that you're an hourly employee. So, you know, there's always that pressure in the back of your head. And a lot of that was trying to overcome some of that stress to remember that, you know, safety, no matter what, would need to come first.
Right. And what are some of the heat safety standards that union members have accomplished to get in their work contracts?
Sure. So in this past contract that was negotiated for year 2023 and that we're currently in, this was a major concern for us. We've had package car drivers who have died due to heat across the country and have been sent to the hospital. Heat-related illnesses are things that happen, and they're not often things that get necessarily talked about. Never know, but there may be a driver who 2 weeks ago had to be brought to an urgent care facility due to some heat-related illness, and then they move on with their lives, and you never really hear about it. But it is a serious thing that could be life-threatening and has been life-threatening. Some of the things we've been able to accomplish as part of the UPS National Agreement, it's Article 18 of our contract. There's an entire article that deals with safety, and there's 2 sections that specifically deal with heat issues. One is Section 14, Moving forward, new vehicles purchased after January the 1st of 2024 will be equipped with air conditioning, which is a first ever. There's also contractual language that UPS Teamsters enjoy for package car drivers that now requires them to have 2 fans in package cars, as well as the old vents that I talked about having to use back during that period. Inside UPS facilities, not just drivers, but inside, the new union contract requires them to install they already had fans, but an additional minimum of 18,000 fans nationwide for inside the warehouse facilities to maintain airflow. And then also we have union-led safety committees in every facility, which are actually run by workers that work there. I was on the safety committee as a driver. And they meet monthly, both inside and outside employees, to go through issues that are happening, make sure that there's coworkers are educated on signs of heat illness. The contract requires the employer to hand out for all drivers 1-gallon durable insulated water jugs. And there's also ice machines provided in the facilities that need to be in good working order and clean and sanitary conditions. So there's a series of things that we've done to maintain that moving forward: air conditioning, fans, water jugs, union worker-led safety committees, education on signs of heat illness and fatigue, the ability to take breaks in the event that you're having a heat-related illness, and the proper steps to do that to make sure that the management is informed of what's happening in those circumstances to keep yourself as safe as possible.
Wow, those are a number of accomplishments to add into the contract. Have you felt that UPS has kept their promise?
I think that in any agreement, it's the workers that safeguard that promise through enforcing the language found in their agreement. And so through safety committees, through workers being educated and standing up for their rights, one of the things that we say, there's 2 things that we say when I was a driver. One, the most important stop that you make is home, safe. And secondly, the only rights you have are the ones that you take. And so educating yourself on what your rights are and then standing up for those rights are the only true safeguard of that the promises are kept.
Absolutely. And, reflecting on everything that we've talked about so far, do you think that all of this work could have happened without being in a union?
These kinds of things are above and beyond what the government or any other legal institution provide, right? This is a legal framework within a union contract that provides enforceable guarantees. Without some kind of similar legislation, which has never happened and probably is unlikely to in the near future, having a contract at work that is legally enforceable, it provides you superior protections in every way, and in particular here, where you're dealing with workers that are outside for long periods of time or on air-conditioned facilities inside.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you sharing more about your experiences, union members, and heat safety.
Thank you very much.
Kevin Schwardfager is the president of Teamsters Local 344. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez. In about 10 minutes, we'll learn how our pets can be impacted by the heat. But first, we're going to go over some tips on how to exercise outside in the heat safely, and what to do if you feel yourself overheating. That's next on Lake Effect on WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Summertime in Wisconsin is short-lived, and naturally we want to be outside as much as possible during these warmer months. Being outside and active is also an important part of our health. But when it comes to extreme heat and exercise, there are some things to keep in mind to stay safe. To go over some do's and don'ts of exercising in hot weather, I'm joined by Ann Schwartz, a professor of kinesiology in the Zilber School of Public Health at UW-Milwaukee. She begins by explaining why it feels like our bodies have a harder time exercising during these hot summer days.
Our bodies have a harder time releasing heat in the summer, really when it's humid, more so than when it's hot. The humidity is really what impedes our ability to release that heat. And the reason for that is because the primary way that we release heat is through evaporative cooling. So we get hot, our body tries to get rid of that heat by increasing our sweat rate. And then when that sweat actually evaporates, that's what cools our body down. And so when it's really humid outside, then there isn't enough of a difference between the vapor in the air and the vapor on our body. And so we don't do as good of a job as evaporating. So we can't cool down as quickly. When you're exercising and it's cool out, your body is really, its job is to help you perform the movement. But when you introduce that heat, your body also has a secondary job of having to get rid of that heat. And that's the role of your cardiovascular system. And so sometimes when we're exercising, it feels like it's a lot harder. And you notice your heart rate's a lot higher because your heart is actually having to do more work to get around it.
So the classic Midwestern line, it's not the heat, it's the humidity, is really true, hey?
That is absolutely true.
So if people, because we want to be active, and ideally, like if we have a routine, we don't really want to get out of it per se. And if people don't have access to a gym with air conditioning, with a climate control, what strategy would you recommend for people planning to do their workouts outdoors in the summer when it's extreme heat?
Right. Yes. Well, those of us living in Wisconsin, we love to get outside when we can get outside. So how can we make it a little bit more enjoyable or bearable when it's really hot and humid outside? The first thing is really thinking about your timing. You really want to think about the times of the day when it's not going to be as hot. So avoiding that 10 a.m. to maybe 4 p.m. time. Those are the times where the sun's the most intense. And so that's going to heat you up even more so if you exercise in the sun during that time. So thinking about exercising in the morning or later in the evening, those are good strategies. Some other things you might want to think about doing is making sure that you're hydrating. So making sure that you're getting enough water when you're exercising, because as you sweat, you're going to lose water, you're going to start to dehydrate. And that hydration level is really important for you to help maintain your body temperature. So you want to make sure that, about 1 to 2 hours before you go out, you want to maybe have about 16 to 20 ounces of water to drink and maybe a couple sips before you go. If you're going to exercise for longer than 60 minutes, then you want to think about maybe taking something with you and having some sips of water as you're going along. If you're going to go out for 30 minutes, you should be fine not exercising. And then when you get back, you want to make sure that you rehydrate, either with some sort of water or electrolyte drink, depending on how much you sweated. A really easy way to determine how much you should drink afterwards is you can weigh yourself before you work out and then weigh yourself after. And the amount of weight that you lost is really the amount that you need to replenish then.
With making a plan to work out outside, you mentioned hydration, planning before, during, if needed, if you're out for a certain time and after. How important is the warm-up and or cool-down components of exercise during hot days?
Well, I would say warm-up and cool-down are always really important. The warm-up is important because it really primes your body to get going and to start moving at a higher intensity or a faster rate. You may feel like your muscles are already warm, but you also need to warm up your heart and your lungs and all the other systems that are involved in exercise. And so it's really important to engage in that warm-up. And then the cool down, that's important to help bring those systems back down to their resting level. And so we need to make sure that we're slowly starting to decrease our intensity. Maybe we go from a run to a walk or something like that. But that really helps us to bring those systems down to our baseline and prevent us from feeling dizzy or potentially even fainting after we exercise. So when you're exercising in the heat, you want to make sure that you just elongate those warm-ups and cool-downs a little bit. And then ideally do those warm-up and cool-downs in maybe a shaded area if you could, to help your body warm up but then cool down and bring your core temperature down in those shaded areas.
If a situation arises or sneaks up on us, which it is kind of easy to do, what are signs of overheating or other heat-related illnesses to look out for when we're exercising outside?
Well, early signs are going to be you're going to start to feel thirsty and you're going to really sweat pretty profusely. And so you just want to kind of monitor that and make sure, that once you start to feel a little thirsty, that you do attend to that. If you start to feel dizzy or lightheaded, or you might get a headache, or even start to experience muscle cramps, and that might be one of the first things that you experience is muscle cramps, then you definitely want to decrease your intensity. So if you're running, again, you want to bring it back to a walk and then head towards a shaded area to help your body cool down a little bit and get rid of some of that heat. But it's a serious situation. You want to make sure that you are being kind to your body. You're doing something good for your body when you're exercising outside. So you want to make sure that you're kind to it and you don't overstress it when it's so hot and humid out.
Right. Because what's the worst case scenario if overheating goes unaddressed?
Right. Then it's a medical emergency. And, you may find that you stop sweating. You may find that your pulse is racing really high. And so you need to then contact medical professionals right away.
So ideally, it doesn't get to that point. So what are some tools? You mentioned like find a shaded area, take a break. What are some other ways that people can help them come down from those initial stages of overheating or just overexertion, and they feel like this isn't the same kind of exertion I want to feel while exercising. This is, a little different.
Right. So the first thing you want to do is stop the activity immediately, because when we're exercising, about 75% of the energy that we use when we're exercising is released as heat. And that's why we get so hot when we're exercising. And so what you want to do is you want to take away that excess heat production. So you want to slow down or stop exercising and then move to a cooler shaded region or area right away. If you can find a building that's air conditioned, perfect. Then, that'll help you cool down quite a bit. If you have extra clothing on, say you have 2 shirts on or you have a sweatshirt over your shirt, then you want to take off that excess clothing to help you cool down. You want to hydrate. So you want to drink some water or drink an electrolyte drink to make sure to start to replenish all that water that you've lost through sweating.
And obviously, we've been talking a lot about hydration. Very important, no matter what kind of activity level you're doing. But my question is there such a thing as too much electrolytes? They are a good reinforcement with more strenuous workouts or if you're being active all day. But if you're not planning a strenuous exercise outdoors, like during the summer, do we need electrolytes all day, every day?
Right. There definitely can be too much. You can overdo electrolytes, and especially sodium. And if you do overdo it, you might have a little bit of stomach upset, or it could cause an electrolyte imbalance. So you want to make sure that you aren't over-consuming them. You want to also be mindful of what's in the electrolyte drink. So know what else you're drinking with it, because a lot of them contain sugar as well as the electrolytes. But for most casual exercisers and those of us who do less than 60 minutes of exercise at one go, plain water is going to be sufficient. Anything over that, if you're going longer than 60 minutes or if you're doing a really high intensity workout, then you may want to consider supplementing with some sort of electrolyte.
Well, and all these are really great tips to keep in mind, and most importantly, to help judge where our body's at and stay safe and cool in the summer. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today to share some tips on how to keep cool and healthy.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you do keep cool and healthy.
Ann Schwartz is a professor of kinesiology in the Zilber School of Public Health at UW-Milwaukee. Hotter summers aren't just hard on people. It also presents dangers for our four-legged friends. Our pets are often not equipped to deal with high heat and require special attention when temperatures rise. Karen Sparapani is the executive director of the Milwaukee Area Domestic Animal Control Commission, more commonly known as MADAC. She says that every summer the commission hears from people who don't know how to properly help their pets deal with the heat. Sparapani joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to share some tips on how to keep your pets cool and how to know when they're in need of medical care.
When you're talking to people about how to care for their pets, what are some of the first pieces of advice that you have for them?
This goes for any temperature, too hot or too cold. If you are not comfortable in it, your pet's not going to be. And humans can sweat in many more places and drink water at will and go into air conditioning, and dogs can only pant through their mouth and sweat through their feet. Most of our city animal is pit bulls or a mix thereof, right? If you have a dog that's any kind of bully breed, those dogs are particularly vulnerable in this weather. People tend to worry about a dog in a hot car. People just think they're animals, they could be outside, they'll be okay. They will not be okay. And if they don't have any shade or access to water, and a lot of people think, oh, I'll just put, a bowl out of water. Many times that either is, consumed immediately or knocked over. So one thing we always suggest to people is getting a plastic baby pool. They're really cheap, and you can fill it up and put it in the shady area, the shadiest area in your yard that the dog has access to. And now this dog, if it's too hot, it can sit in the pool. It will never run out of drinking water. You must change that water every day because some dogs like to urinate in it, but that's a way to ensure that you're keeping that dog cool. Like, that dog has a way to cool off. People are theoretically supposed to have a dog house that's raised with protection from the weather, but if it's hot, the dog's probably not going to go in there willingly anyway. So that's our biggest recommendation. Or to have a timer on a sprinkler to go off every hour, for 10 minutes, just to allow the dog to have some coolness. But again, you have to know your dog. The sprinkler and hose can be chewed up, whereas the baby pool survives typically. But snub-nosed dog breeds, we get them in daily this time of year. And a lot of people just then use home therapies, if the dog's overheated, I'm just going to put alcohol on its pads. That's not going to save your dog. We literally have to intubate these animals on oxygen and put them in cool water, not ice water, cool water, like a little tub, to kind of start bringing that down. And if you go to a regular vet, they might not even be able to treat it, and we're not always able to get in time. So the key is to not let them get there.
So what are the signs, if you are with your pet, that are indicative of, not just a dog that is hot, but a dog that is now in crisis?
Your dog's tongue and gums are going to start turning dark blue. That's number one. They're going to have breathing that's kind of labored. They're sweating so much they'll start leaving paw prints of sweat. But anytime, if you can't go running or shouldn't go running, your dog can't take a walk. And a lot of people do change their schedule and take them out before it gets hot. You can't take your dog on a walk at 12 noon on a 90-degree day. Its feet will burn up. That animal needs you to protect. It's never going to tell you it's too hot.
Now, if you are someone who has a cat, a lot of us are going to keep our cats indoors, and so they won't necessarily feel the heat in quite the way that our outdoor dogs might. Mm-hmm. But some of us do have cats that are coming in and out of the house. We might be caring for cats that just live outside. How do we help ensure that cats are safe in the heat?
There's also people that don't have air conditioning. And we see humans that pass from being kept that have no place else to go. So it's really important, if you do have a pet that you have to leave indoors and there is no air conditioning available, to find a fan. Put a fan on. Keep that air moving. Make sure they have water. And cats are fortunate that they're usually not tethered or restrained in a way that they cannot seek a cooler place. You can leave a closet door open and put a cat bed in there. They'll go under a bed. They will seek the shade and the cooler temperature, or they will lay in front of the fan. There's also cooling mats that you don't have to plug in. You can charge them and leave a cooling mat So they're safe to leave, they're not plugged in, and they can go on the cooling mat. And don't even make it the coldest, because cat's not going to sit on that. Put a blanket or a towel on it, and they can lay there to cool off. Even outdoors, you can use those same methods. There's people that have like a covered porch. They do put a fan on. You can do the same thing with the baby pool, leave water out, just because likely more cats will come for that more hydration. If you're feeding cats outside, it's expensive to do that, and people rely mostly on kibble. We always tell them in this kind of weather to mix in canned food, even if it's the cheapest canned food possible. The moisture, it helps them stay hydrated. People will give cats shelter, like leave their garage door open a little bit. Make sure that there's a fan plugged in there. Always let them have access to moving air, to cold surfaces, and dogs also like ice cubes. So that's another thing you could throw outside, like for your dog to chew on. Like you can freeze a big like Tupperware and just plop out the ice. They'll play with that for a long time. Helps keep them hydrated, gives them moisture. But you have to be a little creative and just understanding anybody's going to suffer out there.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
You're so welcome.
Karen Sparapani is the executive director of MADAC. She joined Lake Effect's Joy Powers. And that wraps up the show for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. From slinkies to microscopes, Science and Surplus is a beloved store in the Milwaukee area. But this quirky institution is struggling to keep its doors open. We'll learn why and what customers are doing to help out tomorrow at noon on Lake Effect. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.